Now about positive stereotypes. So I got up to ADHD, and I'm taking this off an infographic I saw on Twitter, by the way. So under ADHD, as one of the strengths, it mentioned creativity. Now, I don't see how this is actually linked to ADHD specifically. People often also link creativity to autism as well. I don't think that being autistic or having ADHD makes you any more or less creative than anyone else. I think this is a false stereotype. Like some of the other stereotypes I mentioned do have grains of truth in them, as I just mentioned in my other video. But creativity, seriously, I just don't think that having a neurodevelopmental condition affects your creativity. It doesn't mean you're going to be a really creative person, okay? You must blow that one out of the water. Whether or not you are creative or not depends on you as a person. Some people are very creative, some people are not. It's the same as any other person, any regular person. However, I would caveat that by saying that if you have ADHD or autism and you are a creative person, your autism or ADHD will colour that creativity, by which I mean that the way your creativity manifests itself might be a little bit different and say if you weren't autistic or had ADHD. But that's the same as any other variable. Your experiences are going to affect your creativity. It's impossible for them not to affect your creativity. So if you're autistic and you're a fine detail thinker, which many but not all autistic people are, then that's going to affect your creative output. Your creative output might be exceptionally detailed. It might not, it might be. My creative output, I wouldn't say is exceptionally detailed, but for some autistic people, their creative output might be exceptionally detailed because if they have that to the high zenith, if you like, that could influence their creativity. And likewise, if you have ADHD and I don't know, you're very kind of like spontaneous, or you dive into things, or you work really fast, or you have loads of ideas rushing through your head, that's going to affect your creativity. It's impossible for it not to, but that doesn't mean that just because you have ADHD or autism, it doesn't make you any more or less creative than anyone else. That's not something you could say. We can't say that autism makes someone more creative. It doesn't. All it does is it influences creativity if you happen to be a creative person. And but the extent to which it influences your creativity is obviously going to vary from person to person. It might influence it more in some people than others. Yeah, that's all I want to say about that. ADHD, energetic, well yeah, I mean high energy is often part of ADHD, not always, because it depends what type of ADHD someone has. If someone has the hyperactive variety, they're obviously going to be very energetic. If they have inattentive forms, they might be very not energetic, or anywhere in between. So that isn't universal in ADHD, because it depends on the type of ADHD the person has, clearly. I don't know if that's necessarily a strength. That could be a part of a disability, being extremely hyper. That's often why you have people with ADHD have to take medication to kind of bring it down. So that's a bit strange. Verbal skills, well that is just completely whack. I mean, that's the same as with the dyspraxia one. People with ADHD have no more or less verbal skills than anyone else. I mean, that's not even part of the criteria. Someone with ADHD might really struggle to speak. They might be selectively mute. They might have a speech and language difficulty. Someone else might have exceptionally good language skills and everything in between. It's got nothing to do with ADHD, so that one's strange. Okay, dyscalculia. Verbal skills. Again, someone could have dyscalculia, it doesn't mean they're going to have great verbal skills. Dyscalculia often is a comorbid with other conditions. Someone could have dyslexia as well as dyscalculia and really struggle with verbal skills. Verbal skills, having dyscalculia doesn't mean you have great verbal skills, because it depends on what else is going on. In my case, I have dyscalculia. In my case, yes, I do have very good verbal skills. But that's not because I have dyscalculia, that's just because I have NVLD, and actually high verbal skills is part of a profile of non-verbal learning disability. So that would apply, because that actually is part of the criteria, but not all people with dyscalculia have NVLD. And for those who don't have NVLD, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have great verbal skills. Just because they struggle with mathematics, it doesn't necessarily mean that their verbal is going to be enhanced because of that, necessarily. The next one is empathy. No, that's the same as with dyspraxia. People with dyscalculia vary in terms of their empathy. Some have great empathy, some not so much, same as any other person. That has absolutely got nothing to do with dyscalculia whatsoever. Why is that listed as a strength? It is absolutely baffling. Intuition, same applies. I wouldn't say I'm a really intuitive person. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to have it tested. But I mean, yeah, that's just strange. Tourette's, interpersonal skills. What gives someone with Tourette's interpersonal skills? That's got nothing to do with Tourette's. It's crazy. And the same applies to intuitive. Planning strengths, really? I would say it's actually likely to be the opposite. People with Tourette's are likely to have executive function impairments, which means planning is likely to be a challenge. That's strange. And hyperfocus, maybe a bit more likely, but I wouldn't say that's distinctive to Tourette's, but Tourette's often does occur with other conditions that do contain hyperfocus, like ADHD and autism. So yeah, so some of those traits there are applicable, speaking very generally, but like I say, the extent to which they are a strength is variable. And some of those just listed are completely whack and don't make any sense, as many of those traits are not actually part of the definition of the conditions. Now, talking about positive stereotypes now. There has been research to show that positive stereotypes are actually more damaging than negative stereotypes. For example, I came across an article, verywellmind.com, which says that positive stereotypes can be very harmful. This article was written by someone called Catherine Kahn, and it's an American article, and she's an Asian woman, an American Asian woman. And she talks about positive stereotypes in relation to ethnicity, but I think this also applies to disability as well. The article begins by her questioning why she didn't want to be known as the smart one in class. And she questioned whether this was because she was one of the few Asians in her class, or it was because she was a straight A student. She talks about stereotypes in relation to being an Asian female, and actually fits many of these stereotypes. For example, she's introverted and quiet, she has a strong work ethic, she did well in school. But many of the stereotypes don't fit. For example, she speaks English fluently without an accent, she's not submissive. And she says that these seemingly positive stereotypes made her feel just as horrible. And they create challenges in her mental health. They contributed to an ongoing identity crisis. They made her feel depersonalised and feeling undifferentiated. And a 2015 review showed that when positive stereotypes are mentioned in a group interaction, Asian Americans experience negative response. They feel depersonalised for who they are as unique individuals. They feel that others perceive them as undifferentiated from those of a similar group. And those who had a stronger sense of individuality felt more negative response than those who felt they were similar and connected to their ethnic group. Because being grouped with all the other Asians meant that they didn't have a chance to stand out as a unique person. If you're stereotyping me for something good, she says, I am thinking you're most likely going to stereotype me for something bad. Because you can't have positive stereotypes without negative. They go together. They attract each other. They both homogenise whole groups of people as one. They are dehumanising. And in a 2016 article published by Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, reviewed 5 different studies. Looked at the connection between positive and negative stereotypes, and it shows that when Asian Americans experience positive stereotypes, such as being good at maths, they also believe they were being prejudiced against. Stereotypes about various races have a negative history, so saying something good doesn't actually erase that. It doesn't cancel it out. It's another stereotype. It's just as harmful, if not more so. Because you're kind of going to the other extreme. You're still homogenising, you're still singling out, you're still saying because of your group you're like this. You're still not looking at the person as an individual. It's offensive. We must not do it. So she says in this article that Excel is something that she's proficient in and she has in her CV, but she couldn't help but wonder if she was asked for help at work because she's good at numbers or because she's an Asian. So there's always this in her mind, is it because of me as a person or is it because of the group I belong to? And the only reason she had that kind of conflict in her head was because of these stereotypes, because she'd been exposed to these stereotypes. It made her question herself. It led to an identity crisis. Am I being seen for who I am? Or am I being seen as just a member of a group? And that's not very nice. And also, what if I don't live up to these standards? You're supposed to be smart and successful because, there's a stereotype about Asian Americans. But where did this belief come from? Was it a person? Is it in the media? Am I complimenting someone because of who they are or because of what I think they are, based on their group? We must avoid using absolute statements and jumping to conclusions based on characteristics, even if we think they're a positive one. We must understand the personal experiences, unique characteristics and stories that shape them as individuals. And the main issue is de-individualisation, which is the loss of the individual identity in a group. This is especially harmful within an individualistic culture in which people value and identify with their unique sense of self. So, there's